Hi, welcome to the Black Mold of Grief. This is Thomas Graves, and we're going to switch gears a little bit today because we're heading into the holiday season, for one, and number two, I've talked a lot about how I want my first conversation in heaven to be joyful and to be fun and to bring my loved ones joy when I tell them about my life. And so my vision for that is like Thanksgiving dinner, at the end of dinner when everybody's sitting around the table and there's somebody new at the table. The stories just start flying and it's like, oh, you need to hear this story. You haven't heard that story. And so what I thought I would do is share some of the favorite stories that I get asked to share in those situations and share the stories that I want to share when I get to heaven, instead of just talking about a conversation that will bring joy. I thought I would kind of have a conversation with you to kind of showcase some of that. So it's going to be a little bit more lighthearted today. No heavy insights on grief, just me sharing a story about the time I got attacked by a squirrel. So I was in college, and it was sophomore year, at the end of the year, and I was going to take summer classes, but I needed to get a loan to pay for the classes. But in order to do that, I had to be a full-time student. And I was really only going to take one class, but they wouldn't give me the loan for the one class. So I had to sign up for 4 classes to get to the minimum 12 hours. And so I just randomly picked a bunch of cool classes that would have been neat if I was going to go to them, and never went to them, got the loan, and then I was going to drop the classes and move forward. But I'm not the best at doing things on time. And so, of course, I waited till the very last day to do this, and I had to work a lunch shift that day. So I get home, probably 2:00, and I've got 2 hours, and I realize that the biggest issue with this plan that I had was that I had picked classes that were all over campus. So I should have just picked classes that were in my building in the business school, and it would have been much easier, but I didn't plan that far ahead. So I realized I've got 2 hours to run all over campus because, again, this is before internet, so everything was paper. We had to get stamps and signatures and all this stuff. So I changed clothes real quick, throw on some shoes, and I'm heading out. And so I made it. Like, I was so proud of myself. I went all over campus, got everything taken care of, and I'm heading back to the business school where I had to turn everything in. And I've got like 20 minutes to spare. And I was like, I'm amazing. I did a fantastic job today. So as I'm crossing this little bridge over this little creek, it was one of those footbridges that, has the stone on the side and then the little cement cap on top. There's this squirrel sitting on the edge of this cement cap looking at me. And so I walk by, and the squirrels, I don't know if they are on all campuses, but at UT in that time, they were very almost aggressive about coming up for food. And if you were wearing jeans, they would literally scamper up your jeans and, get up to your waist and just look at you begging for food. And so as I'm walking up, this squirrel sits up on his hind legs and he looks at me. And so I kind of was like, made eye contact and acknowledged him and kind of kept moving. And so he runs down and he scampers over and gets a few more feet ahead of me, spins around, stands back up, and he looks at me again. And so I was like, hello, and I kept moving. And so then the third time he does this again, I'm like, I don't want to be rude to the squirrel, and I've got some time. So I make the decision to explain to him and show him that the reason I'm not giving him any food is because I actually don't have food to give him. So I hold my hand out for him to see, yeah, there's no food here. forgetting that I had just worked lunch and my hands smelled like food. So as I'm doing this, he takes his mouth and all the way up to the first knuckle of my finger and just bites down on it. And it's still kind of gentle because he's kind of confused because he's like, this doesn't look like food, but it smells like food. And, why are you giving me this? So anyway, I tug on it and he bites down a little bit harder. And then I tug on it a little bit harder and he bites down a little harder. So then I finally just start dragging him across the top of the cement cap. And he's got his forelegs locked, his back arched, and he is like hopping across this concrete thing with me dragging him with my finger. And so we get to the edge and he still doesn't let go. So I just pull from there and hold it up, my hand up in front of my face, and he's literally just dangling from my finger looking at me. And so I'm thinking, okay, now that this is not food, so you should let go. And as I'm doing that, he starts to swing his body back and forth till he gets his belly up against my forearm. And then he takes his forelegs and he spins it around and he does this with his claws into my forearm, which hurt. So I start doing an S motion with my arm to get him to slide off. But the more I do that, the more he slides, the more he digs in, the more it hurts, so I end up just literally bent over, just whipping my arm like crazy, trying to get the squirrel off my arm. And he eventually does fly off somewhere. I don't know where he went, but how far he went, I don't know. He just was suddenly not on my arm, which is fine. I kind of stand back up and look around, and what I'd forgotten about was the bridge was right next to the main cul-de-sac where all the shuttle buses dropped off for the campus. And so there's like 300 people over there. And I mean, I was screaming and flailing. And so I'm like, okay, I'll just pretend this didn't happen. So I'm like, okay, I've got 15 minutes. I still can make it to turn in all this paperwork. So I get there and get in line, and it was packed. And they had all these stanchions, and everybody was just literally, 6 inches apart, trying to get in line before the door closed. And I am just dripping blood. And nobody says anything to me. Like, nobody asked me what happened. They're all looking at me like I staged this so I could cut in line. So I have to stand there for another 30 minutes, just like moving through this line, dripping blood all over this whole thing. And so I finally get there, turn the paperwork in, and I'm like, all right, I got to go to the health center. So I go over there, and at this point, I'm just pissed. I'm just irritated. So I walk up, and the lady was looking down, filling out some paperwork, and she didn't see me, and but she could kind of see me. But she asked, what can I help you with? And I said, I just got attacked by a squirrel. And she busts out laughing. And I was like, well, I kind of got mauled by a squirrel, if that's not going to be so humorous to you. And so anyway, we go in, the doctor comes in, and so she starts washing the scratches and everything with iodine and cleaning everything up. And I told her, I said, look, I don't know where the squirrel went. I mean, he just flew off my arm and I have no idea. And so I don't know if he has rabies or any other stuff. So she says, well, actually, if you're going to get attacked by a squirrel, this is the best time because the health department just put out a report that I guess every year they, capture wild animals of all kinds, and then they see who has rabies, who doesn't. And so they had sampled the squirrel population, and they did not have rabies. And so based on that, she said, you're good with no rabies. The squirrels don't have rabies this year. So I was like, well, that's good. And she said that report just came out, so we're good. And so she asked about a tetanus shot. And I was like, yeah, I don't know when my last shot was. She said, well, why don't you, she said, well, can you find out? I said, yeah, I'll call my mom. And she goes, okay, if you've had one recently, then you're good. If you haven't, come back, we'll give you a tetanus shot. And she said, but in the future, you shouldn't feed the squirrels. And if you are going to feed the squirrels, you need to have food when you when you do that. And I was like, yes, ma'am, I understand. So I go home, back to the dorm. I call my mom, and the phone rings. And what I did not know at the time was it was a horrible time to call home and say I got attacked by a squirrel, because what had happened, my older brother Chuck had just graduated, and my mom wanted to spend a few days with him down in Galveston fishing before he went out into the big bad world, and that was kind of like their last mother-son weekend together. And so she had done that, but when they got down there a couple nights before, she'd cleaned up the boat, opened the hatches and everything, make sure everything was clean. They came down the next morning to fish, and there were raccoons inside the hull. And so they tried to get them out. They finally got a couple of them out. And so then my mom closed the hatch so that they wouldn't crawl back in. And it was too late to fish for the day, so they did a bunch of other stuff. So they're like, all right, we'll just fish the next day. So they come down the next morning, and what my mom didn't know is that there were actually 4 baby raccoons, and she'd only gotten 2 of them out. And so overnight, the mama raccoon had come back to get the other 2 babies. And so she demolished the boat. I mean, she was trying her best to get through that door and just chewed through everything. The boat would, all the lines, power, the gas lines, everything was just gone. And so my mom had to have somebody come tow the boat over to the marina to get it worked on, and it just ruined the whole weekend with my brother, and she was all upset. And so they decided to cancel the trip at that point, and so they come back home, and literally they had just pulled in the driveway when the phone started ringing. So my mom had put the key in the lock, opened the back door, phone's ringing, she answers the phone, and I was like, yeah, I needed, when was my last tetanus shot? And she's like, well, why? And I said, well, I got attacked by a squirrel. And she just lost it. She was, because everything had just gone horribly wrong, and it was not a good weekend for small critters in our house. So she says, and she denies ever saying this, but she did. She said, okay, well, do you feel like you're going to die tonight? And so I kind of did this little imaginary CAT scan of myself. I'm like, no, I mean, I feel pretty good. She goes, okay, I'll call you tomorrow. And at this point, I still don't know anything about the raccoons. And so I'm like, okay. So I hang up, and then about 20 minutes later, she calls back, and she said, okay, I looked at the shot records, and you're fine. And she was concerned, though, that they didn't have, the squirrels might have had rabies. So she is upset and pressuring me to double check that. And I was reassuring her. I'm like, well, if I'm going to get attacked by a squirrel, this was a great time, because, they just put out this report and blah, blah, blah. And so she was still not quite confident. So she says, we need to call back and ask. And I was like, okay, to help, calm her down. I was like, okay. So I call the health center, thinking that if I don't say my name, they won't know who I am, because this is, again, before caller ID. And so I will just anonymously ask about whether or not squirrels have rabies. And so they answer, and I said, yeah, I was just curious if you knew Squirrel said rabies. And she said, Mr. Graves, I just told you an hour ago that they do not have rabies. And I said, yeah. And trying to act like it wasn't me, but it was. And so finally she's like, okay, did you call your mother and find out about the tetanus shot? And I said, yeah, I'm good on the tetanus. And she goes, okay, then just, you're good. But if you're going to feed the squirrel, don't. And if you're going to, make sure you have food. So that is my advice. I give a lot of advice in the podcast, but I can tell you that I've been squirrel attack free since 1989 because that's really good advice. Just don't feed the squirrels. And if you do, have food in your hand. I call this my Uncle Frank version because he loved jazz and he loved to dance. And he actually passed away while we were recording this. And my cousins have all said this would have been his favorite version. And it is one of my favorite versions because it is so different from all the others. And I really pushed myself to find a lot of joy in recording it and to capture as much joy in the recording as possible. We had a lot of different elements to it. We have live horns recording it, and we have a gentleman in Switzerland doing a jazz vibraphone solo as a full solo, and then throughout he does a lot of call and respond that just really adds to the joy. There's almost a feel of skipping throughout the song, and it just has this great, almost an Ella Fitzgerald Christmas album feel to it, which is one of my favorite Christmas albums, which is what inspired this version.
Sort the memories I made at the end of every day. Scoop up the stack you like and I tuck them all away. Then I pick one you won't want, dig up the pain that's there, and grieve until it's gone. So I have more to share in our first conversation in heaven. I'm gonna bring I'm gonna bring you joy. Don't have a doubt with the way I'm living now. I'm gonna bring you joy. I'm gonna bring you joy. Oh, I'm gonna bring you joy.
Thanks for visiting with us today and listening to the Black Mold of Grief. Next week, we're going to continue with some lighthearted stories, but also the whole point of the podcast and the album is that I don't know where people are in their grief, and I want everyone to feel comfortable grieving however they need. So moving forward for the next few weeks, I'm actually going to do 2 half episodes so that you can pick where you are, because again, heading into the holidays, that's a really tricky time. And so next week and beyond, there'll be an A episode, which is going to focus on some things that I've learned about grief and how I kind of get through the holidays. And then there will also be a B episode, which will be another story that I'm going to bring with me to heaven, be a little bit more lighthearted. Again, I appreciate you watching, and I hope something I've said here today helps you bring a little more joy to your first conversation in heaven.